favorite mpox of General Washington cannot manage to stop the smallpox epidemic. The disease has caused much tragedy. If it could be stopped, what a triumph it would be for the Continental Army. During the American Revolution, the Continental Army was threatened by outbreaks of variola major, or smallpox. Few American soldiers had been exposed to the disease, while a milder outbreak in England a few years back had conferred immunity on most British soldiers, giving them both a military advantage and a means of biological warfare. General Washington recognized the importance of inoculating the troops, and in 1777 directed William Shippen Jr., Director General of Army Hospitals, to begin a secret campaign to inoculate the troops. This campaign would become the first mass military inoculation and would save the Continental Army from the tragedy of smallpox, allowing them to triumph both over the disease and the British Army. So, let's talk a little bit about smallpox. In 1775, the pestilence spread through Boston when it was under siege by the British. The garrison there put a quarantine on the city. Nobody left, nobody came in, at least until the British General William Howe started letting the citizens of Boston inoculate themselves. Shortly hereafter, he started forcing certain citizens out of the city. You could say this was biological warfare. Let me explain. Inoculation is the process by which one infects another person with a milder version of the smallpox. About a fortnight later, the person's body recovers and they are immune. But in this 2-week span of time, they are just as contagious as a person with the natural smallpox is. As such, they have to be quarantined while the inoculation runs its course. If they are let out of quarantine too soon, the disease can spread just as bad as the pox can naturally. But how exactly do we inoculate? Well, let me show you. I take a lancet and make a small incision between the thumb and forefinger, like so. I then take a piece of thread that has been coated in pus from a person infected with the smallpox, and I use it to suture the wound. A few weeks later, when the inoculate has healed properly, he or she must be smoked and bathed properly to prevent the further spread of the disease, and I dispose of the thread used to suture the wound. So back to Boston last year. General Washington was facing freshly inoculated and contagious troops being marched away from British-occupied Boston and towards his men. To stop his men being infected, he had anyone who appeared sickly put in quarantine. Under these circumstances, his quarantine worked. In Quebec, however, it was a different story. The virulence raged, and it wreaked havoc among our ranks. So here we are in a new year, 1777. There is a rife of smallpox here in Philadelphia due to the unregulated inoculation of people throughout the city. Washington and his army are camped a few miles outside the city at Valley Forge. Conditions are bad and the pox threatens a large number of his men. He is contemplating the two main ways of suppressing the disease: full quarantine and inoculation. Quarantining all new recruits presents many logistical challenges with our limited supplies, not least of which is providing them with freshly cleaned or new clothing. The other option, of course, is inoculation. The procedure is expensive and takes a good amount of time to work. I have exchanged many a letter on the matter with my dear friend General Washington. Here is one of my missives, dated January 25th, 1777. I provided His Excellency General Washington with a long list of personnel and supplies needed for the hospital department, of which I now have charge after a little unpleasantness with Dr. Morgan. I finished my letter by communicating my thoughts on the ways of suppressing the pox. The smallpox rages, and it is the opinion of the Committee of Congress and the Generals that inoculation should take place immediately, in such a manner as that those who pass and repass hereafter may not be liable to receive the infection unless circumstances make it proper. It is 3 to 1 that all in town have taken the infection and will carry it to the army unless inoculated. The General wrote me back on the 28th of January, having previously noted that my plans for the hospital department may be a little too ambitious. Where is his letter? Yes, here. Dear Sir, in your last you mentioned your intention of inoculating all the recruits who had not had the smallpox. This would be a very salutary measure if we could prevent them from bringing the infection onto the army, but as they cannot have a change of clothes, I fear it is impossible. We should soon have the troops from the eastward, and as few of them have had that disorder, we should have a great part of our army laid down. So there you have it, the crux of the whole issue. Inoculation of all the troops puts too many soldiers out of commission at once. But quarantine, while effective during the Boston siege, is not necessarily workable when you have so many possibly infected men joining the army. The general suggested a preliminary quarantine measure and ordered that we were to suffer no more of the southern troops to come into Philadelphia, but to march them to Germantown and let them remain there until they are equipped and ready to march. All that now have the disorder to be perfectly cured, and before they are suffered to join the army, to have new clothes if possible, and if not, the old ones well washed, aired, and smoked. Although I felt that inoculation might work better, the general is the commander-in-chief, so I did as he ordered. Dear Sir, I am honored with your 2 letters, and shall pay a strict obedience to their contents, particularly with regard to the smallpox, from which no danger will be dreaded after 2 or 3 weeks. The houses where they are kept are out of the town strictly guarded, and no patient is suffered to remain a minute in the city with the smallpox. For the future, or after the persons now inoculated recover, the greatest care shall be taken according to your Excellency's direction, to remove all the infection from their clothes, if new ones can't be had, and the hospital on Province Island shall be the receptacle for all hereafter infected. Alas, as I feared, the pox spreads as pestilence does in times of war. Within a week I had further word from General Washington, changing his orders. Dear Sir, finding the smallpox to be spreading much, and fearing that no precaution can prevent it from running through the whole of our army, I have determined that the troops shall be inoculated. This expedient may be attended with some inconveniences and some disadvantages, but yet I trust in its consequences will have the most happy effects. Necessity not only authorizes, but seems to require the measure, for should the disorder infect the army in the natural way and rage with its virulence, we should have more to dread from it than from the sword of the enemy. Under these circumstances, I have directed Dr. Bond to prepare immediately for inoculation in this quarter, keeping the matter as secret as possible, and request that you will without delay inoculate all Continental troops that are in Philadelphia, and those that shall come in as fast as they arrive. I would fain hope that they will soon be fit for duty, and that in a short space of time we shall have an army not subject to this greatest of all calamities that can befall it when taken in the natural way. And with this order I have undertaken to begin what I believe will be the first mass military inoculation against smallpox. It is to be hoped that this measure will save our army from the tragedy of the cursed disease, and help us to triumph over the tyrannous British. I should note that General Washington's orders only apply to Continental regulars. As a physician, I imagine this will make any irregulars, including any militiamen, African American or Native Americans, particularly susceptible to the tragedy of smallpox, especially given the British willingness to use the disease as a weapon against those vulnerable to its incursion. Nonetheless, the inoculation of Continental regulars should protect enough of our army to allow us to prevail and turn the tragedy of smallpox into the triumph of modern medicine. Inoculate the Continental soldiers. The campaign spread to other states and their community all over. It's true that irregulars were denied the variolation lancet. Even African Americans perished, infected by other men and by blankets. Nonetheless, the smallpox tragedy was conquered by inoculation. We triumphed over the disease, and